Hi, students. We have just begun our unit on first contact. Um, we talked about Columbus and the conditions that led to exploration. Now we're going to be moving into some of the more concrete effects that this exploration caused. As we move into future classes, we'll be talking about sort of the personal and political impact when we look at the conquistadors like Hernan Cortez. But I want to look at the environmental and geographic impacts of this as well. This is a really important question because one of the things that historians have tried to understand is how a relatively small group of Europeans was able to take over this entire continent of natives. And there have been various answers. Well, the Europeans had guns. Yeah, but the natives had lots and lots of people. Um, and understanding what we call the Columbian Exchange is how we understand why European conquest of the New World was successful. So I'm going to post up now. You should see the definition for your notes. The definition of the Columbian Exchange. This is a theory that was invented by a historian named Alfred Crosby, and he uses the term Columbian Exchange to describe the transfer of plants, animals, and diseases between the old world and the new, starting with first contact, and this is important, continuing through to modern times. The Columbian Exchange has not ended. So I just want to underline how thorough the Columbian Exchange was by showing you some of the transfers and letting you think about what this would do to society. So let's start with the plants, just the crops. So if we look at over 200 years following first contact, here are some of the crops that are coming over from the old world to the new. This is by no means a complete list. We have wheat, barley, oats, rice, bluegrass. I love that one because when Daniel Boone gets to Kentucky, he can't stop talking about how beautiful the bluegrass is. And Kentucky loves their bluegrass. They even have a type of music called bluegrass. And it's not a native plant. It was brought over by the Europeans. It got to Kentucky and it took over. Sugar, millet, onions, carrots. There's also a wide range of fruit, apples, oranges. All of them came over from the old world. Now look at what's coming back into Europe and Africa. We've got tomatoes. Let's just take a moment to appreciate what Italian cooking was like before the tomato. We've got potatoes. Yes, there were no potatoes anywhere in Europe, anywhere in India prior to the first contact. Sweet potatoes, cocoa. Yes, not a drop of chocolate to be found anywhere in France and Switzerland prior to first contact. Just let that sink in. Peppers, peanuts, corn, and pineapples. Just this alone would be enough to change society. In fact, if we look at the population of Ireland, 100 years after first contact, the Irish had grown an average of 2 inches because of the better nutrition provided by having potatoes. Now let's look at animals, and this is going to start giving you maybe a little bit of hint as to why the Europeans were successful. So we talked about before how as Native Americans crossed the Bering Strait into the New World, they didn't bring many animals with them except for the dog. Um, and they sort of only had what they found there. Look at what the Europeans bring with them: the horse, sheep, cattle, oxen, goats, camels, swans, rabbits, cats, of course, the German rat, because nobody spreads plagues quite like the German rat, swans, starlings, donkeys, just a huge, huge number of animals being brought over. Now, there are some animals that came, to a limited success the other way: the llama, the alpaca, and of course the delicious turkey. But as you can see, the Europeans have a huge advantage here, especially when it comes to beasts of burden, to pack animals like donkeys, to horses, which can be ridden into battle. Um, that alone, you might think, would be enough to explain the difference in technology. But now let's take a look at diseases. And I think this is where it's really going to start to sink in. We have one confirmed disease that comes from the New World back to the Old, and that's syphilis. Look at the other direction: smallpox, influenza, measles, diphtheria, typhoid fever, yellow fever, scarlet fever, polio, bubonic plague, cholera. Again, this isn't a complete list. We can't forget about dysentery, about malaria, just on and on and on. And each of these diseases hits in waves. These are what we call, and here's another term for your notes, virgin soil epidemics. A virgin soil epidemic is a disease that spreads to a new population which has no natural resistance to it. All of us are in the process of experiencing a virgin soil epidemic right now. It's this right here, COVID. COVID is a new disease. It is a disease to which we have no resistance. And it's why we've had to spend so much time social distancing and wearing masks and locking down and isolating because we don't have a natural resistance to this disease. We don't have immunity to it. The Europeans had been living with smallpox for thousands of years. It killed maybe 1 in 6 European children, but almost every European had had smallpox and survived it by the time they'd got to adulthood. For the natives, there was no such resistance. Smallpox hit them like a sledgehammer. This is a group of people who had crossed through the Bering Strait, and because of that, they didn't bring many diseases with them, because tropical diseases don't do well in cold places like Ice Age Alaska. And so when the natives started getting sick, they did what they normally did, which is take the sick people and place them in communal living spaces so that they could be taken care of. Because keep in mind, again, the natives rarely dealt with a disease that was contagious. They had cancer, of course. They did have the common cold, but very rarely did they have to deal with highly contagious diseases. And they didn't know that putting people in communal spaces and having the community take care of them was only dooming them to more infections. It is estimated that these diseases killed 70% of the native population in the New World. I want you to imagine what would happen to our society if 1 out of every 4 people died. Yeah, it's not going to be pretty. Um, so that helps to explain why the Europeans were successful, because they inadvertently brought a biological weapon with them, one that devastated native populations just as the Europeans were moving in to conquer. And as I said, the Columbian Exchange hasn't stopped. And that's where you come in. What I'm going to have you guys do in order to understand the effects of the Columbian Exchange is to show how it's still happening. So I've broken you into groups, and we'll be dividing you up into 5 groups here shortly. We have Group 1, we'll be looking at North America, Group 2, Africa, Group 3, Australia, Group 4, South America, and Group 5, the Pacific Islands. Your job is to take on specific roles within these groups, and if you check the classroom folder, I have these roles described in more detail. Some of you will be researching, some of you will be note-taking, and one of you will be a presenter, and your job on Friday will be to present to the class one example of a modern invasive species that has affected the ecology of the specific continent you are looking at. You will need to describe, and this is where your researchers and your writers come in, what the species is, where it came from, what its effects are, and what, if anything, people have done to stop it, people or governments. Okay? So I will be breaking you into groups now. Your first job, once you break into groups, is to create a Google document so that I can see your notes. The note taker needs to make sure that every contribution has the person's name next to it so that I can see who did what. I will also be popping into the groups for the rest of the period to make sure that you guys are on task and to answer any questions you might have. And we will also be working on this tomorrow. So if there are no more questions, I will break you into your groups now. Okay, so at this point, what I would do is break them into their groups. They would have access to a classroom file, which would give them a closer view of the 1 point rubric that you saw, as well as specific instructions and a list of websites that they can use. This would be an 8th grade class, and so I would not feel comfortable simply setting them loose on the web. I would give them sort of a list of acceptable websites, although you will notice on the rubric that I specifically said no use of ask.com, no use of blogs. And this is something that I would be reinforcing throughout the year, the difference between a valid and an invalid source. So the students would be taking on specific roles, which allows them to flourish within these groups, doing jobs that appeal to their learning style, while also allowing them to work around the learning differences and challenges they have. And the groups are specifically designed, specifically pre-created to create mixtures of different achievement levels so that students can sort of thrive and work together and work off of each other, so that you don't have students being left behind. I hope that gives you a good idea of the kind of lessons that I would do. And as I said, within a week, assuming this lesson would be given on Monday, within a week, the students would then be presenting the material back to the class. And that would then allow for not just an assessment of the student's work, but also material that could then be integrated into a summative assessment like a unit test down the road. Another thing I like about this assignment is that I can monitor their work. I can monitor their group chats, make sure that they're on task, answer any questions that they have. I can monitor their Google documents to make sure that they are meeting the requirements of citation and filling in the work that they need to, so that before they get to Friday, when they have to make those presentations, I know that they're on task. And they know that they're on task because they have the rubric to work from. I hope that answers your questions and gives you an idea of how I like to run my classroom, and thanks for your kind attention.